Porsche just solved a problem most people didn't know existed. The 992.2 Carrera S sitting behind me is the first base-level 911 in over 2 decades to gain power from a mid-cycle refresh instead of losing it to emissions regulations. 473 horsepower from a 3-liter twin-turbo flat-6 that revs harder, responds faster, and somehow drinks less fuel than the engine it replaces. If you've been waiting for Porsche to prove that hybridization isn't the only answer to stricter emission standards, this is that moment. Let's find out if the most important sports car on the planet just got better, or if Stuttgart's engineers are simply polishing what's already perfect. The 992 generation turned 5 years old this year, which means we're right on schedule for Porsche's mid-cycle update. If you're not familiar with how Porsche operates, they run roughly 7-year product cycles with a significant refresh around year 4 or 5. The original 992 landed in 2019, so this 992.2 arrives exactly when you'd expect. And true to form, the changes are evolutionary, not revolutionary. Up front, the most obvious change is this redesigned bumper. The center intake is larger and sits lower than before, which isn't just aesthetic. Porsche's aero team needed additional cooling capacity for the revised engine, and they've routed more air to the intercoolers and radiators. You'll also notice that daylight running lights have migrated higher into the headlight assembly. The previous car had them positioned lower, creating what some people called a droopy look. This is sharper, more aggressive. The headlight units themselves are new, with matrix LED technology now standard across the range instead of being buried in the options list. From the side, unless you're a Porsche obsessive, you'd be hard-pressed to spot the differences. The door handles are the same, the body lines are identical, the window trim hasn't changed. What has changed are the wheels. This car wears the new 10-spoke forged design measuring 20 inches at the front and 21 at the rear, wrapped in Pirelli P0 courses measuring 245/35 and 305/30 respectively. They're staggered, naturally, because this is a rear-engine car that needs all the contact patch it can get back there. The rear is where Porsche made the boldest moves, and I'm using bold generously because we're still talking about incremental changes. The full-width light bar has been redesigned with a 3-dimensional lattice structure inside the lens. It's distinctive enough that you can identify a 992.2 from behind at night. The exhaust outlets are slightly larger, and on the Carrera S, they've gone with a cleaner integration into the lower diffuser. The active rear wing is still there, deploying at 90 miles an hour or whenever you press the little button on the center console. What Porsche didn't change is equally important. The overall proportions remain perfect. The rear fenders still swell with just enough aggression to remind you where the engine lives. The roofline still arcs in that unbroken curve from windscreen to tail. The 911 silhouette has been refined over 60 decades, and Porsche knows better than to mess with success. If you park a 992.1 and a 992.2 next to each other, you'll spot the differences. Park this next to a 991.2 from 2017, and most people would struggle. Segment 2, Interior and Technology. Step inside and the changes become immediately obvious. Porsche has completely redesigned the dashboard, and this is the first area where the 992.2 genuinely separates itself from the outgoing car. The center screen has grown from 10.9 inches to 12.6 inches, and more importantly, it's finally running Porsche's latest PCM 6.0 software. The previous system wasn't bad, but it was starting to show its age compared to what you'd find in a Taycan or even a new Cayenne. The new interface is faster, more intuitive, and thank God wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are now standard. The haptic feedback on the virtual buttons is improved, though I still prefer physical controls for climate and volume, which Porsche has thankfully retained below the screen. The digital gauge cluster is still a 16.8-inch curved display, but the graphics have been updated. You've got more customization options for what information you want front and center. I typically run with the analog-style tachometer in the middle because that's what a 911 deserves, then configure the side screens for tire pressures, oil temperature, and boost pressure. If you're the kind of person who wants navigation in your sightline or a full-screen map, you can do that too. The steering wheel gains a new drive mode selector on the right side, which is lifted straight from the current generation Panamera. It's a small rotary dial that cycles through normal, sport, sport plus, and individual modes. You can still access these through the screen, but having a physical control makes more sense when you're driving. The wheel itself is slightly thicker in diameter than before, wrapped in perforated leather and heated as standard. If you option the GT Sport steering wheel, you get the little yellow marker at 12 o'clock, which is completely unnecessary but psychologically satisfying. The seats in this particular car are the 18-way adaptive sport seats, which is a $1,500 option, but absolutely worth it if you plan on driving this car the way Porsche intends. They offer excellent bolstering without being punishing on long drives. The standard seats are fine for most people, but if you're planning track days or aggressive canyon runs, spend the money. The seating position is classic 911, slightly reclined, feet forward, but not uncomfortably so. Visibility is excellent in all directions, which is increasingly rare in modern sports cars. The rear seats remain exactly as useful as they've always been in a 911, which is to say, not very. You can fit small children back here or use them for additional cargo space. I've thrown helmets, camera bags, and jackets back here without issue. Anyone over 5'6" is going to be uncomfortable for anything longer than a quick ride across town.
Material quality is where Porsche continues to justify its price point. Everything you touch feels expensive because it is. The leather is supple, the switchgear is weighted perfectly, the aluminum trim doesn't feel cheap, and the overall fit and finish is beyond reproach. You won't find the interior rattles or panel gaps that plague some of Porsche's German competitors. This is assembly precision that borders on obsessive. Now we get to the part that actually matters, the engine. Porsche's 3-liter twin-turbocharged flat-six has been the heart of the Carrera S since the 991.2 generation introduced forced induction across the range back in 2016. That decision was controversial at the time among purists who mourned the loss of naturally aspirated scream, but the performance gains were undeniable. For the 992.2, Porsche's engineers went back into this engine with specific goals: increase power and torque, improve throttle response, reduce emissions, and enhance reliability. On paper, they've succeeded on all fronts. Peak power climbs from 444 horsepower to 473, a gain of 30 horsepower. Torque increases from 390 pound-feet to 420 pound-feet. Those are significant jumps for a mid-cycle refresh. How did they do it? The short answer is more boost pressure, revised turbocharger internals, and a new engine management calibration. The longer answer involves some genuinely clever engineering. The turbochargers themselves feature redesigned compressor wheels with optimized blade geometries that flow more air at lower back pressure. The wastegates have been recalibrated to hold boost longer through the rev range, which is why peak torque now arrives at 2,300 RPM and holds flat until 5,000 RPM. That's a massively wide torque curve that makes this engine incredibly flexible. The exhaust system has been completely redesigned with larger diameter piping, revised catalytic converters that meet Euro 6e emission standards, and new muffler internals. If you option the sports exhaust, which you absolutely should, you get electronically controlled valves that open under hard acceleration or when you select Sport or Sport Plus modes. The sound is deeper and more purposeful than the 992.1 Carrera S's, with less of the synthetic enhancement Porsche was criticized for in earlier 992 models. Power routes through Porsche's 8-speed PDK dual-clutch transmission that's been recalibrated for the increased torque. Shift speeds are imperceptibly quick, measured in milliseconds rather than perceptible time. In automatic mode, the transmission is smart enough to predict what you want, holding gears through corners and downshifting aggressively when you brake hard. In manual mode, using the paddle shifters, you have complete control, and the transmission will hold redline without upshifting, even if you're bouncing off the limiter.
The rear-mounted transmission feeds power to a mechanically locking rear differential, which is standard on the Carrera S. This isn't an electronically controlled limited slip. This is a proper mechanical lock that progressively engages based on load and slip angle. Under hard acceleration out of corners, you can feel its shuffling torque between the rear wheels, keeping everything planted and pointed where you want to go. The performance numbers tell the story. 0 to 60 happens in 3.1 seconds with the Sport Chrono package, which is standard on US spec cars. That's 0.2 quicker than the outgoing model. The quarter mile passes in 11.2 seconds at 125 miles per hour. Top speed is 191 miles per hour, limited by aerodynamics and gearing rather than power. These numbers put the Carrera S within striking distance of cars that cost significantly more money. Numbers on a spec sheet only tell part of the story. What matters is how this car communicates with you through the steering wheel, the seat, and the pedals when you're actually driving it. The steering in the 992.2 Carrera S is everything you want in a sports car. It's hydraulically assisted, not electric, which means there's genuine feedback coming through the rim. You can feel the front tires loading up through a corner, sense when you're approaching the limit of grip, and make minute corrections with just your fingertips. The weighting is perfectly judged, heavy enough to feel substantial, but light enough that you're not fighting it in tight switchbacks. This is the benchmark that every other sports car gets measured against, and most of them come up short.
The suspension setup is classic 911, McPherson struts up front, and a multi-link arrangement at the rear. Porsche's PASM adaptive dampers are standard, and they make a tangible difference between comfort and sports settings. In normal mode on rough pavement, the ride quality is surprisingly compliant. You feel what's happening beneath you, but it's not harsh or jarring. Switch into Sport Plus, and the dampers firm up noticeably, keeping the body flat through high-speed compression and allowing you to carry more speed through corners with confidence. Launch control is almost comically effective in this car. Enable Sport Plus, engage launch control through the menus, left foot on the brake, right foot flat to the floor, release the brake and hold on. The PDK manages clutch slip and torque delivery with computer precision. The rear tires hook up with just a hint of slip, and you're catapulted forward with relentless force. The acceleration doesn't taper off as you climb through the gears. Third gear pulls just as hard as second. Fourth gear still feels urgent. This is turbocharged torque doing what turbocharged torque does best. What makes the 911 special isn't straight-line speed, it's the way it rotates through corners, the balance you can achieve with throttle modulation, and the confidence it gives you to push harder with each lap. Turn-in is immediate. The front end bites. You trail brake to the apex, then unwind the wheel and squeeze the throttle as the rear squats and drives you forward. The rear engine layout, which should theoretically be a liability, becomes an advantage once you understand the physics. The weight over the rear axle gives you traction that mid-engine cars can't match on corner exit. The brakes are 6-piston calipers up front clamping down on 350mm rotors, 4-piston rears on 330mm. Stopping power is phenomenal, with excellent pedal feel and zero fade even after repeated hard stops. If you plan on tracking this car regularly, you might consider the carbon ceramic brakes, but for street use and occasional track days, the steel brakes are more than adequate and easier on your wallet when it's time for replacement. The engine note deserves its own discussion. Porsche caught heat for the sound synthizer in early 992 models, which piped synthesized engine noise into the cabin. They've dialed that back significantly in the 992.2, and what you hear now is more authentic. At low RPM, there's a mechanical thrash from the flat 6 sitting behind your head. Get into the throttle, and the turbos spool with an audible whoosh before the exhaust opens up and delivers a crisp metallic wail. It doesn't sound like the naturally aspirated Metzger engines from the 997 GT3, but it has its own character, and it's legitimately satisfying. Fuel economy is predictably terrible if you drive this car the way it begs to be driven. I've been averaging around 16 miles per gallon in mixed driving, which drops to single digits if you're spending time in the upper reaches of the rev range. Highway cruising at 75 miles per hour returns mid-20s, which is respectable for a car making 474 horsepower. The fuel tank holds 16.6 gallons, which gives you a realistic range of around 250 miles between fills. In the 992.2, Porsche has loaded the enough driver assistance technology to keep regulators happy while making most of it defeatable for enthusiasts who prefer to drive without electronic intervention. The surround view camera system is genuinely useful when you're parking a car this wide in tight spaces. The 911 isn't a small car, and those wide rear haunches make it easy to misjudge distances. The camera gives you a bird's-eye view with predictive guidelines that show your trajectory based on steering angle. Adaptive cruise control with stop-and-go functionality makes freeway driving less tedious, though the system is conservative with following distances compared to some competitors. The drive modes make a substantial difference in character. Normal mode is the daily driver setting. Compliant ride, relaxed throttle response, transmission shifts happening early to maximize efficiency. Sport mode sharpens everything up, holds gears longer, opens the exhaust valves, and quickens steering response. Sport Plus is the track setting, stiffest dampers, most aggressive transmission mapping, stability control loosened to allow more slip angle before intervention. Individual mode lets you mix and match settings to create your own preferred balance. Wet mode is a recent addition to the 911 lineup, and it's smarter than you might expect. Sensors in the wheel wells detect water spray, and the system proactively adjusts stability control parameters, throttle mapping, and all-wheel drive torque distribution on cars so equipped. On this rear-wheel drive Carrera S, it primarily manages throttle response and traction control to prevent the rear end from stepping out on slick surfaces. You can override it, but it's nice to have the option when weather turns bad. This particular Carrera S carries an as-tested price of $143,000. The base price is around $122,000, but Porsche's options list is extensive and expensive. This car has the sport exhaust, adaptive sport seats, sport chrono package, premium sound system, and various interior upgrades that add up quickly. Is it worth that money? You're paying for engineering precision, build quality, brand heritage, and driving dynamics that are genuinely class-leading. The competition includes the Aston Martin Vantage, Jaguar F-Type R, Mercedes-AMG GT, and Chevrolet Corvette Z06. All of them are excellent cars in their own right, but none of them deliver the complete package quite like the 911. The Corvette is faster for less money, but it doesn't have the refinement. The Aston Martin is more exotic, but it's not as reliable. The Mercedes is more comfortable, but it's not as engaging. The 911 exists in a unique space where it's practical enough to daily drive, comfortable enough for road trips, fast enough for track days, and iconic enough that people will be talking about it decades from now. Porsche didn't reinvent the 911 with the 992.2, and that's exactly the point. They took what was already one of the best sports cars on the planet and made it incrementally better in the ways that matter. More power, sharper responses, improved technology, and the same fundamental character that's made the 911 relevant for over 60 years. So here's my question for you. If you could only own one sports car for the rest of your life, one car that had to do everything, from daily commuting to track days to weekend road trips, would it be a 911? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more deep dive reviews like this, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.